Welcome to the first in a series of 3 recordings for the Cisco OpenStack edition on Folsom with a multi-node deployment. So this first recording we're going to go over a high-level topology view and then get into the first of our 3 nodes that we're going to build. The first node that we're going to focus on in this recording is the configuration of what we call the build server. This is where we're going to be running Puppet Labs open source edition of Puppet and many other applications that we'll talk about later that we will then subsequently use to build out our 2-node OpenStack environment. So what we have here is we've got an all virtual machine environment. In this example that we're walking through for the recording, we've got a build server on Ubuntu 12.04. We'll build it first. We have a central kind of a network here we're calling the management network that is on the 192.168.80.200 network, or I'm sorry, the 80.0/24 network. We've got a control server and a compute server. And then the control server, which is running the quantum components such as server and so forth, we're going to have a second Ethernet connection out here for our public network. We have a virtual machine running as a router to allow us to route out to the public interface on this Mac. I am running VMware Fusion in this example. Now, if you wanted to do this in a physical environment, which I've done many times on both Cisco UCS B and C series, you can easily replicate all of the things that we're going to cover in our instructions in a physical environment. The difference would be, obviously, is that they are physical nodes, at least, some of them, maybe some of them, for example, the build server is a virtual machine. But in my environment, we also have physical connections for the control server and various compute servers, as well as access into physical switches and then the rest of the data center. So you can see between the virtual environment and the physical environment, really all that changes is this component out here and the fact that it's running on physical hardware. Okay, so let's get moving here. So we're going to start off with our instructions in the docwiki.cisco.com Folsom multi-node URL, and we're going to be walking through these various instructions. Some of them we're going to skip because they don't apply to us, such as examples with proxy configurations. I don't have a proxy in this environment. And then we're just going to follow through these instructions in 3 different segments. The second recording will be with the build of the compute and control nodes, and then the third recording will be deploying Quantum and doing some actual testing. So we're going to start off here. We have already configured a single virtual machine as the build server. It's just running Ubuntu 12.04 and it has its Ethernet information in. Other than that, I have done nothing to it. So we're going to go ahead and start with our instructions here by getting into root. Okay. And then if you're running proxies, you want to pay attention to some of this because sometimes some proxies from some vendors have problems with apt-get and so forth, and you some of these tips may actually help you. Now, in the configuration of the build server and all the services and applications that go on top of it, you can go down one of 2 paths that we have provided for you. You can go through Model 1, which is running a script that really takes a lot of the copy, paste, or typing out from you. Or you can go Model 2 and actually run all of the clones, the apt-get updates, copying your manifest, doing all of your Puppet modules and so forth by hand. So whichever one you choose to work with, both are totally fine. In our environment, we're going to do it as simple as we can, and we're just going to copy this command in here and run it. So this is going to go out and do lots of things. It's going to update our environment. You can see here it basically runs through the script version of it. Would run through all of the updates, install Puppet, get, and other things, run clones for all of the manifests that we need, and pull in the modules that we're using from a Puppet environment. So I'm going to kick this off, and then we're going to pause the recording and come back once this thing is finished. Okay, we're back. We can see that it now has a success and is telling us that we can go and edit our site pp file and then do our apply. Okay, so if we come back to our document here, we ran this curl and it pretty much did all these things for us that you would have needed to run manually. So we've got all kinds of stuff that was automated for us. So if we get over here, let me kind of move this window around a little bit, over to our Puppet manifest directory, and we take a look at this, we can kind of see this file structure is pretty much what we have echoed here. Okay, so the next steps that it would tell us in the customization of our build server, which is really the most important function in our entire environment as it relates to building our OpenStack environment through Puppet, is through this site.pp file that we're going to take a look at. So according to the instructions, we would copy this site.pp.example file out to site.pp and then go edit it for our specific environment as it indicates here, and then go and run the Puppet apply on the build server that we have configured here. So what we're going to do to kind of save a little bit of time is one, I'm going to show you where you can go take a look at outside of taking a look at the site.pp.example file in here. You can actually look through it at the GitHub Cisco Systems Folsom Manifest multi-node site. So you guys will have, you can follow through this in the instructions. It points to where all this stuff is at. So this is kind of an example of where all of the site.pp stuff is actually at as it relates to the default. So you can kind of follow through some of these. I'm not going to walk through all of this because we already have a default version that we have modified specific to our environment. So let's go take a look at that. So we've got a file out here that I've got site.pp.mine that we're going to copy here, and then we're going to copy, sorry, I could have shortened that up a bit. Okay, so we got the original there. Now let's go in and see if there's any edits that we need to do for our specific site file. So in our environment, we're not using a proxy, so we've got that commented out. We're going to use the default location. We're going to use the default build name, which is build-server. And if you change this, there's some other places I'm going to tell you about that you need to point to those changes throughout the file. I've updated an NTP server, and then I have the specific IP address, network, mask, and gateway for our environment. So it is definitely different from the default. I've added my domain name. This stuff I have left the same. So we've got, I'm going to drag this down here a little bit so we can see it a little better. The default username, which is local admin, and password Ubuntu, is what will actually be on our control and compute nodes when we're finished. We see that we've got our controller information 80.200 and control-server. Again, if you change this host name, you need to change it in some other places within the file that I'll point you to. Then down here, we're basically using the defaults as far as the interface configurations are concerned, but one thing that you really need to be watchful on is this install drive. So the default file points this to a SDC. In my environments, these are virtual machines and they go SDA. You may have a physical box that goes SDA or SDC, or a combination of multiple different device values based upon are you running RAID and so forth. So you really need to know this value ahead of time before you really kick this off, because that value is super important when we launch into the Ubuntu install. I'm leaving all of the credentials, the defaults. In a production environment, obviously you would want to change these things for your specific environment and have stronger passwords and so forth. So here in the OpenStack node definitions is where we do definitely quite a bit of editing for our environment. So the cobbler node section would be applicable if you're running, for example, a Cisco UCS series and you're running CIMC and IPMI, where you're going to go and log in and actually boot these nodes, either by powering them on or do a reboot or something like that. So if you've got non-default parameters in here, such as a different password, or you've got a UCS domain in here, you need to go and change those values. In my case, they're a virtual machine, so that really doesn't apply. Now, under my cobbler node definitions, I'm leaving the default hostname of control-server and compute-server 01. If you're running completely different host name values, you have to make sure throughout the site pp file that they're consistent, and you've updated those host names throughout the file. Our node type is a control, and here's the specific MAC address of my 2 virtual machines that I'm going to fire up. This is the IP addresses of the nodes that I'm going to assign when we boot them. And then here we've got these power addresses. I just always, on a virtual machine or whatever, I fill them in as the same values, but you can also leave them as empty quotes if you're not using them. If you are using power addresses, for example, you're going to log into CIMC and power these nodes on through Cobbler, then this would be your power address that you have identified for your CIMC interface, okay? So super important to get that stuff right, especially your MAC and IP. Now down here's the last section that you would want to go and make sure that your host name values are correct. So in build server, control server, and compute server, and then the same IP address information that we have above, okay? So that's pretty much all I wanted to walk through on that. You can take a read. It's a very well documented file for you to go and kind of understand some of the more description around why certain things are configured the way they are. So we'll leave out of there because we are happy with what we have. Okay, so let's get back to our instructions. So it's telling us, hey, once you're done editing this and you've got it all ready, let's go and apply the site pp file. So let's kind of move this up here a little bit. And again, this will definitely take a while. Why? Because we've got all of this stuff is going to be installed on our build node before we go and configure our compute and our controller node. So it's going to go out and install all of these and then configure them based upon the parameters we've identified in these various .pp files and the modules that we have downloaded in a previous step. So this will take a little while. So I'm going to kick this off and then we'll pause the recording and we'll come back when it's done. Okay, we're back. So we have a Puppet apply that happened. We got all this stuff now configured and installed on our build server. Our next line for our instructions here is to run our Puppet plugin download. So once that's done, I like to reboot the node. You don't definitely have to do this because the Puppet is configured to run these services and restart the services and make sure everything's good. Or it starts whining about it inside of your Puppet run. But I like to reboot these nodes. So I'm going to pause it, reboot our build server just to make sure everything's cool, and then we'll come back. Okay, we're back. So now our next set in our instructions here is to take a look and make sure our setup looks good. So in our configuration, we got a compute and a control node. There's an extra one in the instructions here, but we're only running one compute node in this virtual environment. So the next thing is to kick off our clean node setup. So what this script does, and you can actually take a look at what this script is going to do. It's going to log in, or it's going to actually connect into your CIMC or IPMI enabled hardware, if that's what you're running, to log in, reboot the box. If there are any previous client registration from Puppet or SSH keys, for example, if you built this environment and you wanted to tear it down but not rebuild your build server, then you would want to go out and clean. If not, they would have existing certs and keys and so forth. So that's kind of what this script does, is it goes and cleans some stuff out. Now I'm going to stop the recording here, and we're going to pick it back up on the build out of the controller and the compute node for our second session that we have here. So let's stop here, and we'll pick up on the next recording.